Okay, welcome back. So in this lesson, we want to continue where we left off. And so we will write a code for create code, which will allow us to process the inputs that was provided in the quote form and send those to our quotations table in our database. So the first thing we need to do is to ensure that the data in the form is being processed using a post method, okay, as opposed to using a get method. And so in your introduction to web development course, you were taught the difference between get versus post. So to recap, to refresh your memory, if we do something like Turkey, okay, right? So you notice that in the search, in the URL bar here, you'll see that after the question mark, we see the parameters that we typed in, okay? And so it's clearly visible for everyone to see. That's when you use a get method. Obviously, if you're entering your password, username, you wouldn't want that information to be displayed here. And so for that reason, we submit forms using a post. So if you notice here, I say method is post. So the first thing you want to do is to check to make sure that our form is being processed using a post method. All right. Okay. So what I'm going to do is to say if the request that method is not, and I'm going to use HTTP again, instead of saying method, or sorry, instead of saying post, I could actually call a name method post. Okay, so this is one of the shorthands. Instead of having to actually type in the name post, I just use a variable that Go has defined for me, which means post, and that is method post. Okay, so it's better to use these constants than to be using strings. Right? So I could have said post. Okay, but it's much nicer to just use what Go provides to us. Method post. Okay, so if the method is not post in my form, right? It's not being method post. Then I want to show the user the form again. Okay, I don't want to do anything else but show them the form and say, you know what? You need to fill in this form again. So all I need to do is to do a redirect, because remember, a redirect allows me to move or to send the user to a URL of my choosing. Okay, so I'm going to send them to back to quote, and then I'm going to use HTTP dot status C other. Okay, and that's the 303. All right, and of course, in your introduction to database to web development course, you talked all about redirects. All right, so I didn't want to return. I don't want to do anything else except leave the function. Okay, I just want to leave. Okay, I'm done. Okay, so let's assume that the method is post. Then what do I want to do? I want to actually process the values in the form. And remember, my form has different fields, and I've given them a name: author name, category, and for the text area, it's called quote. Okay. So what Go will do, Go will collect these values in the input boxes, and it will associate with each name, quote, author name, category. It will associate the value that the user typed in. So it creates a map. And since you all are students who've done many programming courses, right? You know what a map is. So the values are stored in a map. So we have a key, we have a value. The key will be the name here. Okay, so how do I tell Go to create this map for me? Well, we simply say r that parse form. And what this does, it will create that map for me. However, if you notice, it also returns an error message. Okay. Okay. So let me save that error message. And of course, I will need to check that error message to see if there's an error. So if error is not nil, I know I have some problem. And so I will simply use this one here. Okay, so I'll just copy this, right? And I'll paste it, right? We'll ask, we there's some internal server error. Okay, well actually that wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be a server error. So it would actually be something on the user's part. Okay, so I'm gonna not call it internal server error. I'm gonna say status bad request. Okay, so the user entered something bad. Okay, and so I'm gonna change this to status bad request. All right, so the user didn't do what they were supposed to do. Maybe they submitted the form with no values, and so the map could not be created. Okay, so let's assume that the user did, and by the way, if there's nothing in the form, then it makes sense for me to leave the function, right? There's nothing to process, so leave the function, right? There's nothing to write to the database. Okay, so we exit our function. Okay, so let's assume that there are values in the form. Go was able to create this map for me, which has the name, the values, the keys, and the values. So all I'm going to do now is to pull those values out. Okay, whatever the user entered for author, I'm going to ask for those. Whatever the user entered for category, I'm going to ask for that. Whatever the user entered for the quote, I'm going to ask for that. And so how do we ask for that? Well, we use the r.post form function. All right, and there is a method, a function, sorry, called get. Okay, you provide the key, it gives you back the value. So I'm going to ask for author underscore name. That's what was in our form, right? And it will return to me what the user entered in that box. And so I'm going to save that in the variable called author. Okay. And then of course I'm going to do the same for category. Okay, I'm going to ask for what is in the category box. And then finally I'm going to ask for the quote. Okay, so what is in the quote box? Okay, so I have my inputs, and so I will now create the insert statement. So I'm just going to call it S for short, and I'm going to use the backticks. Okay, and so I'm going to simply say insert into quotations. Okay, and oops, okay, quotations, and I'm going to insert into the author name column, into the category column of our database, of our table, and I'm going to insert into the quote column. Okay, what am I going to insert? Well, I'm going to insert values $1, $2, $3. Okay, great. So with that set, I will now go ahead and perform my db.execute. So db.exec, then I'm going to send S, and I'm going to send the data along with S. Author, category, quote. Okay, and then db returns an error, exec returns an error. So I'm going to simply have that here. Okay. Whatever else is returned, I will ignore it. All I care about is the error message. Okay. Okay. So let me check for the error. Okay, and if there's an error, then it means that something went wrong in our database in Postgres. Okay, so if something went wrong inside Postgres, then that is a internal server error. Okay, it's our fault. It's our system that is the problem. And so if it's our problem, then I'll just come here and I will use this. Okay. All right. Okay. Now I will remove the return because there are no other statements after this last line on 56. So this will return anyways. Okay. So why put a return? Okay. So we have a problem though, and it's telling us that db, what does db mean? And so this goes back to my statement I mentioned earlier, that when you move the handler functions into their own files, and this applies to everything that you move. If it's in the same package, then you can see the functions that are in that package. You can see names that are in the global space, okay, like the structs. However, you cannot see names that are inside a function. And what do you notice? db, if you go back to main, db was inside. I created db inside main. So this handler function cannot see inside main. It can't. So we have a problem. We need db because that's our handle to the database. If we don't have that, then we can't write to the database. So what do we do? Well, there are many ways of fixing this problem, but for this, I will use the simplest approach. Okay. Later on, we'll look at another approach which helps us when we have multiple other functions to see. Now, you could say, let's just make everything global. Okay. But if you have 10 things that all the functions in the package need to see, it's not really nice to have 10 global variables, because remember, the more global variables you have, the easier for those functions to change the global variables. You don't want that. But for now, we will create a global variable. And so I will take this and I will place it outside main. And if I place it outside main, it means it's accessible by any function. Now, there's one thing you must remember. Whenever you create variables outside of a function, you cannot use this shorthand notation. It doesn't work outside of functions. So what I have to do, I'll have to use the assignment, and then I'll have to use a var. Okay? So db now is accessible here. Okay? Okay. Everything looks okay. Let me make sure everything is good. Okay. All right. All right. So I have all my handlers. All right. Good. So let's give this a go. Let me make sure did I create my URL? Let's see. My URL. Oh, this is not right. The URL should have a /. Now it's right. All right. So the URL should have a /. Okay. So / quote should take me to the form. And when I submit the form, then the form says I should run to this URL. Okay, so I'm saying that when you hit the submit button, we should go to this URL. And what does that URL do? That URL calls this function. And what does this function do? Well, as we just did it, it writes the data to the database. Okay, so let's see if it works. And by the way, since I have the handlers and the main in different files, I can no longer say code. I can no longer say go run main.go. If I do that, it will say, what is home? What is create code form? What is create code? It doesn't know about those. So to get around that, we say go run this entire directory. And so Go will stitch together everything. Okay, it knows that there are multiple Go files. Use all of those to look up for those names. Okay, so that means this entire directory. Oh, okay, it's saying me that I already have I already have one running. Let's see. So it says already in use. So let's see. Yeah. Well, Control L. So let me close that. Let me close that. Let me try again. Go run everything. Oh, another one is in use. Where is it? I don't recall having another one open. Do I have another one open? Let's try again. Okay. It's the moment of truth. Local host 4000 should give me that. Good. Box / quote should give me that. And let me create a quote. Let's say Jane Smith. Maybe life. Don't sleep too much. Okay. We're going to submit. Okay, so notice it takes me to this URL. Of course, nothing shows here because we didn't specify anything. Maybe it would have been nice to have like a message, quote added or something. So the one way to verify if our quote was added is to check our database. So let's select, our table. Select quote from quotations. Okay, and there you have it. Don't sleep too much. All right, so to recap, let me stop this. Okay, so to recap, we simply follow this pattern, which is make sure that our form is using post. All right, and then once that passes, then we get the values from the form. Okay, we'll check for the values. If we have the values, we use the post form functionality to get those. We prepare our SQL statement, and then we execute that statement. Of course, if there are any errors with that, then we return a status internal server error since there's something wrong with our system. If the user didn't enter in proper values, then we say status bad request. All right, and there we have it. Now, keep in mind we are not checking to see if the inputs are valid, right? That they're actually meaningful things, that they are of a certain length, and so on. All right, but that's not something too complicated. What we care about is knowing how to actually perform CRUD. All right, and so this is how we insert a quote. The next thing we're going to look at is to see how we can read a quote from our database. Now, when we return, we will also look at using another approach to this here. Okay, so we said this was sort of a global. Okay. In the next lesson, we will look at how we can use another approach instead of this global variable approach, which turns out will be something that you do a lot because it's a common pattern where whenever we need to pass certain variables to functions or to other parts of your code that need to see it and need to access it, then we're going to use that approach. So I'll see you in that video where we'll discuss that, amend our code to reflect that new approach that you will learn. Great, I'll see you in that next lesson.